Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Got to See God Through. I'm Gabby. This is the first episode that will be on YouTube, so yay to that. As you can see, I do not have my co-host with me today, and that's because it is probably 12 o'clock at night, and I'm making this video. Um, for a minute, I felt like God was telling me to do this, um, and so I was like, I'm not doing anything. Might as well do it now. Um, so let's just talk about why Marquise is not here. Marquise is simply not here because it's 12 o'clock at night. Um, and yeah, he's still a part of Got to See God Through. I'm sure there will be another episode where he was on here or he'll be on here. But this is just a solo episode this time around. So I really just wanted to talk about the space where God has me right now and really just dive into that and just have a raw uncut conversation and hopefully it helps someone. So yeah, let's just start about like where we are in life right now, right? um it's currently February 16th. February 17th, it's 12 o'clock at night. February 17th, 2024, we are in a whole new year. So not only are we in a new school year, we are in a whole new year, right? And so I think the last episode I dropped was probably, I don't know, April of last year. So it's almost been a good year since we've dropped the episode on Got to See God Through. And I really apologize for that. Honestly, it just became a back burner type of thing and it happened like that and it's sad, but hopefully after I post this, it be, it can become more consistent, even if that means I'm the only one posting or I'm the only one, hosting, whatever that is. Because I do want to be consistent with what I feel like God was calling me to do in this season. So let's just give a quick rundown before we get to the deep stuff. Um, I'm a junior now in college. Me and Marquise are both juniors now in college. Um, it's just really been school, 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 school. And we actually started a group on campus called Wildfire. It is a Bible study for every student here at Trinity, which is the school we go to. And then also it's open to like young adults out there in the world. So I could definitely leave more information in the like description box if anybody is ever interested in that. But yeah, we started a group. It's been amazing. Um, and I've really been seeing God show up in a crazy way for that group. So now that that stuff is out the way, let's talk about the season that God has me in, right? Because I just feel like we should just get straight into it. This year, I don't know if I talked about it in past episodes, but um, there's student leadership positions on my campus, and this year, I got the role as outcry leader, right? And what an outcry leader is basically a student-led worship group, and I'm over that group, right? And so I help plan services. I plan the service with two other amazing people, and we plan services, we pick the songs, we do little devotional times, things like that. So I'm starting off there because I feel like that's where my life went, you know? And it's crazy to say because it's like, what do you mean? Especially because like this is something I wanted. But little did I know God had something up his sleeve, right? And so I'm starting there because it'll make sense. But anyway, yeah, so I became an outcry leader this year. Um, and it being my junior year, and last year, before that, I was a chapel intern. And so when I was doing that, it kind of prepared me for the moment I was in now, leadership wise. Uh, so yeah, I started that back in August. In the beginning, I was actually very, very like nervous about it because although this is something I prayed about and this is something like I wanted to do, it hit me that I've never done that before. Like I sing all the time. I sing in my room. I sing in the shower. I sing with my friends. Like I'm always singing. But to actually get up in front of, I don't know, 30, 40 students every Thursday, not every Thursday, but each Thursday that I lead, give a devotional and then sing. and then be expected to be like on top of my relationship with God because you're leading, that came with a whole different pressure that I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for it. And I wasn't, right? And so we'll get to that soon. But yeah, so I started that this year. And so like I said, like in the beginning, like it was smooth. I was still learning. I was very shy. If you know me in person, like, and this is like in general, like friendships, things like that. Like it takes me it don't take me a minute. Like I'm an open person. Let me scratch that. I'm a very open person, but for me to feel comfortable with you, that does take time, right? So I was very like shy in the beginning, and like I didn't really say much about. I was doing a lot of observing because I wanted to observe before I like actually, stepped into it. And now, like really looking back on it, I I did it. I was shy because like I honestly didn't know what I was doing, and I was more comfortable letting other people take the lead than me taking the lead, which is not good, you know what I'm saying? And so, honestly, like in those moments is when I started seeing like, okay, God's about to shake something up in me, right? And so I get up there and lead a couple times, and I'm just feeling like, you know, this is off. Like something is not right about this atmosphere. And it wasn't about the leading, it wasn't about the songs, like something about the atmosphere that we're worshiping in, the atmosphere that we're in. Like there's something not right about it, right? And so growing up, like I've always had like the gift of discernment, right? And so if you know about any gifts of the spirit, that God gives and things like that, like one of those is like discernment, right? And so I've always had a strong discernment for things, and I'm like, yeah, this ain't clicking the way it should be clicking. And it's been like that all 3 years. And so, but it was just more intense in that moment. And so in the beginning, I just started seeing a lot of things that God was like showing me. Like he was just showing me all the broken places in Outcry, the broken places on my in my campus, and just all these things where it started to get very frustrating and overwhelming because it's like I see what God's trying to do, but we're not doing it. And I felt like, okay, well, God, you're showing me for a reason. So what do you want me to do? Right. And so as I'm going through that, I'm like, okay, what are you truly calling out of me? Right. Because I don't know. It was just really, how do I say, it wasn't difficult, but it was just very frustrating. Right. And so we're going out throughout the year. And as that starts getting tougher, I also start getting distracted by other things, right? And I'm not gonna go into like that deep of details. I don't need everybody in my business, but I was just entertaining things that I shouldn't have been entertaining at the time, right? And so it started taking my focus off of God. And the thing I've learned, right, especially when it comes to like Satan and how like strategic he tries to be, like, or just in general when it comes to like distractions, when you sin, there's things that are taking you away from God, right? It's not going to happen in an instant. A lot of the times it's slow, so you don't even notice. Like, for example, like if you have a habit of like reading your Bible every single day, and one day you're like super super tired, and you're like, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes the next day. The next day becomes the next day. And the next day becomes the next day. And as soon you look back, you haven't read your Bible in 3 months. So it's like stuff like that. Like it's slow. It's never like that, because if it was like that, you would know. So it's slow, like small distractions. It's always small first, and then it gets big, right? So for me, I was getting distracted by people who ultimately shouldn't have been in my life, right? But I opened the door to it freely too, right? Like I knew it was gonna become a distraction. I knew that I shouldn't have been in certain situations, but I did it freely because it was like, which we'll talk about later on. I was being my own God, but we will talk about that later on in this episode. So yeah, I God started showing me a lot of stuff about Outcry, and I was getting frustrated because I felt like we weren't doing what the things that God told me personally to do, in Outcry. And so I felt like there was a burden there. But in the midst of all this, God sent me my roommate. Shout out to her. And we clicked like that. Like I know people talk about it all the time about having like soulmates and stuff like that, but that girl right there is truly like my friend soulmate. Like I feel like God made her specially for me because like we 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 just balance each other out. You know, in Frozen, where we sing that song, we finish each other's sentences. Like I literally can think something and she knows vice versa. Like that is really my girl for real. But enough about that. Yeah, so in the midst of that, gosh, built that or gave me that friendship, and then um, it was me, Marquise, and this other kid, and we all just became this big group, and it was beautiful. Right in the beginning, we would spend a whole bunch of time together. We would talk about God together. We were literally like the Fantastic Four, like literally. And I just was like, okay, it's all coming together. Like I got my little friend group. I got this situation going on. I got Outcry. Like yeah, college is now being what college is supposed to be around, right? And so in the midst of that, we start Wildfire because we're like, okay, if Outcry is not doing it for us, we need to create a space where students feel or not only feel welcome, but we can teach them about things that Trinity's for one not teaching, but also giving them a space where God can move in their lives and God can just move on this campus in general, right? And so that's where Wildfire came out of, right? That's the birth of Wildfire. And so we started that, and that was big. Like in my head, the first night having at least like 25 kids come find out about Wildfire is insane to me. Like I was expecting like 10 people. No, like a whole bunch of people showed up the first night and I'm just like, okay, yeah, like we're on the right road. And so I'm getting hyped. I'm like, yeah, my life is great right now, right? But in the midst of all that, like there's little spots right there where I'm like, who what you doing, guy? Like, don't do that. And then there's little spots where I'm like, yeah, don't touch that. You know what I'm saying? And like as I'm going through all this, simultaneously, I don't even think I said that right. Simultaneously, y'all not even gonna hear me struggle right now. Anyway, slowly but surely, in the corner of my eye, I am seeing God like knock at the door, like, hey, you need to deal with this, or hey, you need to deal with that. And I'm ignoring it because I'm like, he can't be possibly telling me to fix that right now when he's been showing me all this stuff, right? He couldn't be possibly telling me to fix this stuff, right? So I'm not focusing on the things that he's telling me to pay attention to because I'm like, you telling me to pay attention to the bigger cause. But again, God will show you a bigger picture and start you off small, right? And so I'm ignoring that stuff because it's just like, yeah, at some point I should probably pay attention to it, but like not right now, you know? And so I'm going on about my life. I'm vibing out, like I'm chilling. I'm cool, like everything's great, right? And then stuff start happening with my little situationship, right? Cool though, because in my head, I'm like, this is normal. I'm in college, like, cool. Um, and that's great. And then stuff start happening in my friend group, and I'm just like, okay, that's weird, but I'm still rocking with it. We're in college, like I get it. God, like this is ordained by God. Nothing can reshake it, okay? Because if it's ordained by God, I'm thinking we should never have a problem. You know what I'm saying? But I be forgetting we're human, and I be expected too much from humans. You know, so yeah, stuff just start falling apart surely, but slowly. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Um, and so I'm going out throughout my day, and I started to notice like my time with God starts to dwindle down. I'm not reading my Bible anymore. I'm not praying as I should be praying. I'm dealing with doubt. I'm constantly asking my friends to pray for me because I don't feel like spending time with God. I don't feel like praying. I don't feel like reading my Bible. And it was a lot of I don't feel, right? It was all a lot of I. And it was never like I don't feel like reading my Bible, but I'm gonna read it anyway. Or it wasn't I don't feel like talking to people about God right now, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Or it wasn't I don't feel like writing this song about God, but I'm gonna do it anyway. It was always I don't feel like it, so it's not happening. Right. And in myself, I would low key get frustrated because it's like, Gabby, like you say you're a Christian, you say you believe in God, but you're not putting any effort to build this relationship with him, or you're not putting any effort to trust him, or you're not putting any efforts to get to know him for who he really is. And a lot, and I've talked about this before, I think on a podcast, is like a lot of times, like I would beat myself up because I have a religious mindset, right? I have a mindset of like works for God instead of just having a relationship with him. And in the midst of everything that was going on in my life, right, I seen God trying to tear that down. Like I've gotten words about it, I got prophecies about it. And it's like, yeah, but I don't trust you enough, right, to do it. So again, like going back to like I was ignoring those things that God was throwing in my faces because I honestly didn't trust him. And if we're being completely honest, we're still working on that trust right now. But that's besides the point. Like I just didn't trust him enough. And so I would ignore it. And so when those moments start getting deeper and harder and stuff like that, like I would just push it to the side because absolutely not. Um, so I will say by like maybe mm, winter break is really when it all just went to pieces. I say Thanksgiving. I don't know. One of them breaks, I was done for, right? Because even in the midst of that, like I wouldn't say my relationship with God was like I'm just done with God completely because there were moments where I was just about to give up. But again, like I said, like the friendship that God gave me is so ordained because if I didn't have them, I would have walked away. I promise you. But I was still in the midst of fighting. Like, is this really what I want to pursue? Do I really want to surrender my life to God? Right. And so I would say over winter break is where I was just like, ah, like there was a situation, right? And so in the situation, I'm going to speak on it, right? The situation was I was thinking back on a word that I got, right? Because like I said, like it wasn't that I was completely done with God. Like I just wanted to, I was in a spot, right? Let's just back up a little bit. I was in a spot where I wanted to get rid of everything I knew, right? Because I feel like everything that I knew about God was just not correct, and that's what was messing me up. Like everything that I knew about God was not correct. It wasn't helping me, and so therefore it felt more like I had to work for his love. I had to work for his presence. I had to work for everything that people experience um God as. I had to work for it, me personally, right? And it was like everything that I wanted from God, I had to work for it. Every word that people get, I personally had to work for it. And so it wasn't a relationship. My relationship with God was work. And so I wanted all that gone. I was like, God, I want to know you for who you actually are. I want to know you for the way these people talked about you. I want to know you for where I could spend hours and hours and hours in your presence because you're just that good. And I didn't know God like that. Like, I didn't know God for that, right? And for me, it felt like he wasn't going to reveal himself to me like that either. And at some point, I was just like, I'm the unlucky one who doesn't get to experience God, right? And I was really becoming more like okay with that because it felt like he was just far. And not even far in the sense like his presence wasn't here because I always knew God was with me, but from a distance. Like I could wave at him, he'll wave back, but he gonna keep walking, right? And so that's how I felt about God. So I wanted to tear all that down. So over break, before break even started, right, I got a word back in I think October when we had a prophecy night on Wildfire, and he basically spoke towards something that for one, let me just say, I did not know this man from a can of paint. My friend knew him, right? That's the only reason he came to Wildfire is because he knew him, and so when he spoke this prophecy over me, right, he brought up my car that I still don't have, but I will be getting in the name of Jesus. He brought up a car, and I was just like, "How do you know that?" but and he basically was like, it was on his way, right? And so there was one day I was sitting in my room, and I was asking God about it. I was like, God, like what am I doing that I need to be doing in order to get this car? Because I'm saving money. Like I feel like I've learned good car money management, right? So like what else am I supposed to be doing? And so I felt like God was telling me um to do something specific, right? Um hold on. I felt like God was telling me to go put a down payment on a car, right? And I was just like, what do you mean by that, right? Like, what do you, a down payment? I only have this amount of money, like that's not gonna really get me anywhere. And he goes on to say, like, go put a down payment on the car and I'll do the rest, right? And for me, that was like, yeah, I could do that, right? In my mind, when I first heard it, I was like, yeah, I could go do that. But I was like, I need confirmation first. Like I get it, but sometimes I struggle with trusting that I heard God, if that was me or if that was God, right? And so I text my group chat of friends. I'm like, yo, like, can y'all pray for me or pray for this? Like, ask God if this is what I heard correctly. And so the next day they come back and they're like, yeah, this is what God told me. This is what He put in His Word. They showed me this verse. And it was just like it was lining up, and I was just like, yeah. So I'm building the confidence to actually walk out on faith in this one, right? And so break starts, and I'm like, okay, well, let me lock in though. Let me lock in with God. And honestly, like really think about on this is honestly why I didn't get the car during break, because like I said, like I wanted to build a relationship with God that was just strictly like that I knew him for who he really was, not strictly, but I just knew him for who he truly was, not because of what the world's told me, not because of what somebody, mama told me. Like I wanted to know him for me, for myself, right? But again, like I had that workmanship mentality, so I was like, okay, well, I need to hear God clearly. Well, I need to start spending more time with him, because obviously I haven't been locking in like I should. Like I'm not reading my Bible as much as I should. I'm not praying as much as I should. Like let me actually do the steps that I need to do to hear him clearly, right? So I went on a fast. I went on a fast. Um, I started like worshiping more. I started sitting down and like praying and then sitting there and listening. And God did speak in those moments, right? He really did. And like he brought it to me about pick up your cross and walk, which we'll talk about that later down the line too, because everything that he told me in that season of time was very useful. But again, my heart wasn't in the right position, right? And now looking at it, like it really wasn't. Um, but my faith was growing. Like it was really weird balance, right? And so when I was in this process of trying to buy this car, my faith started to dwindle a little, because um uh how do I explain this? My faith was getting pushed at. Um and it was like I was getting told, like, how are you gonna pay for it? How are you gonna pay for this? How's this gonna happen? It was just a lot of pushback, and it was like, okay, we're looking at it in the natural. We need to be looking in the spiritual, and I'm trying to keep my faith. So I'm like, okay, God, I know you told me to do this. I know this is the word you told me to do, but how do I do this without you know going against the person that I also told you that if this is not what you want me to do, don't allow it to happen, right? And so because I also didn't want to go there, spend all this money, and be like, and then come back and when God was like, that's not what I told you to do, right? But God's good enough to give you grace and mercy. And I'm glad that's what he did in this situation. But yeah, it was just a lot of push on my faith, like testing my faith. And I'm trying to stay strong in my faith. And then at one point where like things just were not lining up the way that I thought they should line up, I just backed up, right? And God showed me, like, after that situation, like I do that a lot. Like I when something doesn't go my way, right? Listen to the hint word my way. When something doesn't go my way, or when I feel like, okay, God, like it's taking too long, I will literally back up. I'll be like, all right, skip it, right? And I'll lose any faith that I had in that moment, right? Because it didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen. It's just very self pride there, for being completely honest about it. Like really looking at the situation, like that was my pride. Like, okay, well, it's not happening my way, so skip it all, because why does it matter, right? And so that's really what happened over winter break. And so but I still decided, like, no, I'm still gonna sit here and pray. But even that ended after, like, the car situation didn't work out the way I wanted. I stopped praying. I stopped pressing in like I was. I wasn't doing it as much. It just wasn't the same focus I had in the beginning, because at this point it was like, well, you don't need anything from him now, so why are you talking to him? And that's not the right attitude to have from God. A little part of me was a little upset, because it's just like, you said this but you didn't do it, right? And so my mind is just not in the right place at all. Um and looking back at it, like I keep saying, like it just all makes sense. But something that God was really like dealing with me with over break was pick the phrase "pick up your cross and walk." And so over break, I went to California, and I'm on the plane, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm really thinking about like what does it mean to really pick up your cross and walk. And so I'm on the plane, and Jesus starts spitting bars, and so I'm gonna read a little bit um, of what he told me, right? And so Jesus, as he was speaking to me on the plane, he said, Jesus laid down his life for me so I could be set free. Free from what? The things that keep me captive, my thoughts, others, lies. Jesus came to give me back dominion. What does it truly look like to pick up your cross, right? And so this is really long, so I'm just gonna pick a little section. Well, we have time. I'm gonna read the whole thing. Um, Looking back on Jesus' life, his whole existence was picking up his own personal cross, I can't talk tonight. Figuratively, and eventually becoming his reality. Jesus came to save the world from their sins. He was put in a human body and experienced everything that a human could ever experience, meaning he had a conscious mind to choose against the cross that he would soon carry. He had the choice to choose against what God has sent him to do, but yet he still chose the burden. Why? Why did Jesus still choose God over what he wanted? As we look back in the Word in Matthew, we see Jesus on the mountain praying profusely to God to the point where he was sweating blood. The weight of what he must do was coming to him. In that moment, he asked God, "Take this cup away." Jesus wanted to get didn't want to get on the cross anymore. He wanted to walk away from what God had sent him to do. Was Jesus wrong for feeling the way he did? I know if I was Jesus, I wouldn't want to die for the world either, especially after the case when people his own people would reject him. In the same passage, even in the same breath, we see Jesus say, "But yet not my will, but be done but yours." In the moment, in that moment is when I believe Jesus truly picked up his cross and decided to walk. He decided that over everything else that he wanted, God's will is the one that he chooses. So the answer why, I think Jesus knew that the love of God has for his people, for one. He knew the weight of his purpose, and he knew the beginning and the end of what it would cost. He knew that if not him, then who? That's the question I ask myself. If not me, then who? Why is it so hard for us Christians or even me, to pick up my cross and walk? Is it the lack of faith? Is it because I can't see the beginning and the end? Maybe it's both of those things. One thing that Jesus constantly shows in his lifetime here on earth is unconditional love. Jesus' life was love. He represented what true love is and what it should be. I think the main reason why Jesus was able to choose God was will over his own is because he loved the Father, the love for the Father. When you love someone or something truly, you will most likely do anything for them or that thing. For example, your job. When you love your job, you most likely will do a lot to stay on top of your work, get promotions, etc. When you love someone, you will mostly do a lot of things to show that you care for them, that you hear them, etc. Jesus' way of showing God that he loved him back was through his obedience to him. Our purpose requires obedience. Obedience is simply agreeing to operate in a way that is presented. Disobedience is doing the opposite of what was presented to you. Jesus basically agreed with God in which what God told him. Sometimes we must simply just agree with God. This is the first step to walking in obedience. But I think it's deeper than just agreeing, because sometimes we don't agree with God because we don't see the full picture. It's frustrating and it's hard and it's sometimes overwhelming. Sometimes it's easy to allow ourselves to make our own purpose according to our will and not God's. It seems less stressful and less intense, but in reality, we don't choose God's will because we lack trust. We lack understanding. But the word says, "Do not lean on your own understanding," for a reason. Did Jesus understand why he had to go on the cross? Well, yes, probably. So let's use a different example. Peter, when Jesus told him to walk on the water, Peter stepped out in faith, trust, right? That he would go, um, that he would get to Jesus. A lot of us think about the part when he took his eyes off of Jesus is where he lost focus purpose, which is very true, but look at it from a different perspective. When Peter took his eyes off of Jesus, he tapped back into his own understanding. The storm around him was something that he understood. Him being able to walk on water was past his understanding, and that's when he began to sink because he started to release he started to release Jesus' understanding, even his word, to walk towards him. And began to let things around him and the things that was happening in the natural to affect his purpose. If I was Peter, I would have been thinking, what if I sink? What if this storm and this wind knocks me down? Although the Bible doesn't mention what he was thinking, it is easy to assume he was nervous. As Christians, we are like Peter in a lot of ways. We step toward our purpose, but we remember the last time we failed. We remember the lies that were told to us. We remember how painful it was. We look at the storm and start to sink, or we start to thinking, what ifs? Not only was our focus off God, but we begin to take the responsibility of our purpose back in our hands. Your purpose is not your responsibility. I know that sounds harsh and weird, but trust me, it's not. When you're a child of God, it is God's responsibility to give you the resources and tools to reach your purpose. So I just read that really long thing to say what, right? I'm on the plane again when all this is happening. And I was just in the moment, I was like, okay, that's a lot. You just dropped a gem, but that's a lot. Like that's a lot to process. And so when the whole time I was in California, right, I'm just what does it really mean to pick up your cross and walk, right? And I'm thinking about what he told me, and I'm thinking about Peter, and I'm just like, Gabby, like, where are you picking up your cross and walking in your life? Because you're not. Like I'm not picking up my cross in any type of way, right? And so as I'm in California, I stayed like a week longer than my mom. Mind you, my brother lives in California, so I was staying with him and his fiance, right? And I was in the room and I'm watching sermons, and I'm like, okay, there's this one sermon I wanted to watch um that I didn't watch, and it was about like emotions or like something like that. It was like something to do with like spirits and emotions, right? Um and so I'm watching it and I'm vibing, right? And so he started talking about like your desires or something like that. And my bad. One second. My bad. Um and so God started talking to me about desires, right? And so to make a very long story short, um he showed me how your desires are connected to when your desires are not lined up with God's desires, right? That is the seed of creating idols. And I was like, idols? I don't deal with that. Like, what are you talking about? I'm thinking, yeah, I may be on my phone a couple times, but like, idol, like, I don't worship nobody else but God, right? Me thinking in my human brain. No, God broke it down to me, babes. I was like, oh, like once he was like, no, like okay, let me just say this, right? We're all created to worship something, right? And God is gracious. He's not going to force you to worship him. But one day, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord, right? And so you may not be worshiping God, but you might be worshiping that relationship. You may not be worshiping God, but you may be worshiping that friendship. You may not be worshiping God, but you may be worshiping that job. You may not be worshiping God, but you may be worshiping loneliness, depression, addiction. Like you are worshiping something whether you realize it or not, right? So, but it all starts at when your desires are not godly desires, right? And so he started showing me that like you gotta watch what you desire because that could turn into an idol, right? And so I'm like, okay, thanks for dropping that gem on me. Now what, right? And so I'm texting my group chat. We're really trying to like work through it, figure it out, right? And so we get back to school, and like I said, like my roommate is my closest friend on this campus, right? And so we get back to school. Um, I think it was like 2 days after we get back, we like chatted it up. We were catching up on stuff that was happening in our lives, right? Like we didn't talk over all break, but that's just what the girlies do. I'm just a girl. Um, but yeah, she goes home again on Sunday, I believe, because we get back on. We got back on a Friday. She leaves again to go to church on Sunday, right? And yeah, that girl did not come back for 2 days, and I was just like, okay, that's weird, but cool. Um, and then some things happened with her, and it ended up being, yeah, I'm not really coming back to campus to sleep here. Like, I'm going home every day. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll let you have that. God, what are you doing though? Because that's not. Mm-mm. I'm not rocking with that one, right? So I was like, okay, that's fine, but it's not fine. So I'm like, all right, well, cool. I'll just see her when she's here, I guess. But that one kind of threw me for a loop. But it made sense because God kind of already told me it was happening. So it was like, he told me beforehand. I just kind of ignored it. Again, I have a thing of just ignoring things. I should stop doing that, but I did. Anyway, so yeah, that happened. And then our friend group stopped hanging out like that. Like, we're not seeing each other as much. And I'm like, okay, like, what is going on? And slowly but surely, I became in a isolation situation. And I was like, absolutely not. No. Like, no, 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 no. I'm not rocking with that. So what did I do? Tried to fix the problem myself, right? I started hanging out with people. I started doing stuff that, like, I don't I'm not saying like I nah, like stuff I just don't do, right? I'm hanging out with people more that I, again, like in the beginning of the year when I said I was distraction, you're a distraction. I was hanging out with the distractions, okay? And so the day that I think I like told my friend group to like, hey, oh, I told them to pray for me because I wasn't getting sleep. I was getting anxiety attacks in my sleep, and it was just not good. And I was literally getting attacked in my sleep, and I was not digging it. So I told them to pray for me, right? And so when they did that, Marquise came back with this word. And every word that I've got from God has always been an encouraging word, except this one. It was not encouraging. In fact, it scared the mess out of me, and I was like, ha ha ha, oh no, right? And basically the word was, he's taking his hand off the situation. If I want to be my own God, right? If I want to serve myself, he's gonna allow it to happen. But he's taking his hand off the situation. Nowhere in that did he say he was leaving me or forsaking me, but in my head I said, oh, I failed or you're done for. Like, God's done with you. That's how I read the situation now. Do I think like that now? No. And am I glad that he allowed the stuff that I'm about to talk about to happen? Absolutely. Because I would not be here right now making this video if it didn't happen, if I'm being completely honest. And he knows that. So God's good, okay? Um, but yeah, he basically was like, I'm taking the handout situation. You get to choose. You get to choose if you want to serve me or if you want to keep doing what you're doing. And then me, I was like, that's weird, but okay. Like, did it scare me? Yeah, because did I think I was like he was about to in my life or something? Absolutely. Am I just being dramatic right now? Yes. But like, I don't know. I just never got one of those words before. Like, I've seen other people get it. And I'm like, ooh, that's scary. But like, it happening to you, oh, that's babe. That's a different feeling. So when it happened to me, I'm just like, okay, like, what do I do? What do I do? And they were like, that's the point. You keep trying to do stuff, just sit down somewhere. And that didn't click for me, right? I literally, it did not click until recently. And I just want to say God is so good, guys. Like, and I hope, like, I know this is long. I hope this is really helping somebody, like, for real. But I went on, right, about my business. I'm like, okay, well, if I'm not supposed to do anything, I'm just gonna keep doing like what I'm doing then, right? And so I'm still hanging out with distractions. I'm now hanging out with this low key new friend group. Because again, like, my friend group is not on campus like that no more. So I was by myself, and I didn't like that. Like, I didn't like that I was by myself. So I'm hanging out with this new friend group. I'm doing more homework. Like, I'm more productive at school. Like, not to say that I haven't been, but I'm putting more effort to my stuff. So like, my grades are looking chef's kiss. Mwah. Like, it's looking great, but yeah, I'm hanging out with distractions that I shouldn't be hanging out with. Like, it was not looking good. Like, I'm doing stuff that I usually wouldn't do. And I'm like, okay. And so I met this particular person, and it became very clear to me that I should not be hanging out with you. And it wasn't because of the stuff they were doing necessarily, because like other people around me were doing it, the same things that they were doing, it wasn't affecting me. But it was something that was about this person was like, yeah, you might be my downfall. You know what I'm saying? Um, but yet I still decided to hang out with them. Um, and then long and behold, maybe 2 weeks after I met them or whatever, God was like, yeah, no, cut off. I said, oh, okay, cool, right? Um, so that person was no longer in my life, and I'm just like, all right, that's fine. I see what you did there, but no, but I'll deal with it, like, fine, right? And then literally the next week, somebody else that the first distraction, right? The vibe, I just wasn't feeling it no more. I was just like, yeah, no. Like, we're cool, but yeah, no. And I was like, okay, cool, right? And so all these people start falling off, and all these things start happening. I'm not feeling this. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just like, all right, this is obviously God's hand, right? And in the midst of like before all the cutoffs, right? Let's go back a little bit. Before all the cutoffs, God is showing me little by little every day how I'm being my own God, right? How I'm trying to control the situation, right? And I was just like, okay. But and honestly, like speaking, if I'm looking at it, like it all felt like a build up to the moments of all the cutoffs, right? And so I'm like, all right, something the climax is gonna come. The storm is going it's going to rain. The clouds are forming and it's going to thunder. I'm literally just waiting for it at this point. And so when it happened, I'm just like, all right, this makes sense. But the thing is, even when it happened, God showed me how I was trying to be my own God, right? Because when it happened, I'm like, okay, how am I gonna be cool with this person again? How am I gonna do this to fix this? Like I'm just trying to come up with solutions. And he was like, see, that's you trying to figure it out. You're trying to figure out how you're gonna be cool with that person again. You're trying to figure out how this is gonna happen and this is gonna happen when I never called you to that. I called you to surrender everything to me, right? And I'm like, whew, okay, cool, right? And so this is all leading up to where I am now in life, to the present day. Like, I feel like my whole relationship with God has been centered around I acknowledge you are God. I acknowledge Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and I accept that. And I acknowledge that I am a child of God. But you don't get to be my personal God. You don't get to have any impact or input in what I do in my life, who I hang around, what I listen to, any of that. Like, at the time that like what when I first got saved again, right? Was I listening to Christian music all the time? Absolutely. But in the season I'm in right now, like I've noticed my increase in secular music, right? And I noticed my increase of just doing things that in my past life before Christ I would do, right? And so he just showed me how I slowly started to get off track, and how this entire time I'm claiming to be this child of God, but I'm not serving him. Like I'm serving him in ministry, but I'm not serving him with my heart, with my life. You know what I'm saying? Like I say I am, but what actions am I truly taking that show that, right? And so I was like, oh, okay. Like I'm not doing this right. And so in the season I'm in right now, God has truly been shaking my foundation. And honestly, it's a purification, honestly. And again, like when Marquise first gave me that word, I was just like, okay, like is God abandoning me? Is he done? And my roommate really had to like remind me, like, God is a teacher and he's also a father. And for me, like I didn't grow up with a father figure, so I don't even I reject anything that deals with fathers, because what does that even look like, for one? And two, like my experience of a father isn't healthy. So it's just like you telling me that God is my father doesn't. Mm-mm. If my example of a father, if my father is the example of a father, I don't want it. And so God has really been breaking even that down. Like It's been really good. But God's even been breaking that down. He's been being a teacher to me, a father to me, and I'm just like, okay, right. And so I find myself now relearning prayer and relearning worship and what worship truly is, and I'm just really walking this out with God, because a lot of times we don't even realize that we are serving ourselves or serving other things, right? And going back again to when I got this word, like we were breaking down like what idols are, right? For example, like if you deal with a lot of fear, we know everything. I think personally everything is spiritual, right? And so behind fear is a spirit. And so although you may be seeing Jesus, 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 when you bow down to fear and you allow yourself to live in fear, you're serving fear, right? Or when you have an addiction to something, you're bowing down to that addiction because you're saying, yes, God, you are God, but you are not strong enough to handle my addiction. Or you're saying, yes, God, you are strong enough, but you're not strong enough to handle my fear. Yes, God, we love you, we serve you, but you're not strong enough to handle my pain, my burden, right? And so you're bowing down to anything that you're not giving to God. And so God was really showing me that like I'm not I'm not like simply I'm not bowing down. I'm not surrendering, right? Because we talk about how God's yoke is easy and is light, and He tells us to cast our burdens onto Him and things like that. Um, but the picture is like, how do I really do that? And so, in the season that I'm in right now, in the current state of February 17th at 1 a.m. in the morning, I am broken. And that's just the honest truth. Like, I am a broken human being who has a heart to love God, or has a heart to serve God, and wants to serve God, and wants to spread the gospel, and want to do all these things wonderful for God, but I don't know Him, right? And I could sit on this podcast and I could say, yes, God is good. Yes, I love God. And I could say all the Christian things, but do I know Him, right? And so in this season, I'm starting to relearn God in a way that He wants me to learn Him, right? And so I'm learning that I'm not gonna know God the way somebody else knows God. And He's been literally today, right? We were talking about it. Like, He's been dealing with me about comparison because I've done that my whole life, right? Not just for myself, but like my relationship with God, I've always compared my relationship with God to other people's. Oh, I'm not praying hard enough. Oh, I'm not doing this hard enough. And in reality, like my relationship with God, your relationship with God is never going to look like somebody else's. You might have similarities. You might have gone through the same things, and so now you can talk about them and, encouraging one another in that, and tell them what God did for you in that season that was similar. But your relationship with God is never going to look like somebody else, because for one, we all have different callings, and how God wants to do something is how He wants to do it. It's never going to look the same for you as it did for somebody else. And that's what I'm learning. Like, what God wants for me is not going to look the same for somebody else. And like, I used to be so heavy on like, okay, I got to get up at 7 a.m. I got to read my Bible at that time. I got to pray at that time. And that became so heavy, so like work mentality. Like I was saying, that it, it honestly, when you have that work mentality, when you have that religious mindset, it pushes you away from God, because that's not what He's calling you towards. Again, He's calling you towards a relationship with Him. And so when you're not when you're not walking in that relationship with Him, when you're not thinking of Him as a father, as a friend, like let's just start there. Like, when you're not communing with Him in those type of ways, it's hard to see Him, because that's not what He called you towards. And another thing is like, as I'm going through this, right, I'm reminded a lot of Paul. I don't know the specific where it is, but I know it's in the Bible, right? Where Paul talks about, I do what my flesh wants and not what my spirit wants, right? And so sometimes, and this is why it's good to fast too, but sometimes our flesh is stronger than our spirit in moments. And for me, I've been feeding my flesh like crazy. So that's another reason why I'm like, me and God, yeah, no, it wasn't happening. Like, yeah, I love Him. Yeah, I'll pray here and there. Yeah, I'll worship here and there. But nah, nothing too deep, because I can't handle deep right now, and I couldn't handle deep right now because I was feeding my flesh too much. So I had to start feeding my spirit, right? I had to start crucifying my flesh, and that's also what comes with picking up your cross and walk. Because listen, like when Jesus was on the cross, His flesh was getting whipped. He was getting spit on. Like there was crazy stuff happening to Jesus on that cross, but His flesh was getting crucified, right? And so as Christians, we have to also crucify our flesh. Like, this thing cannot be controlling you because it's literally going back to the grave where it's going back to dust. And so why are we letting it control you for when we're supposed to be living in spirit and in truth, right? And so that's another thing that I have to work on, is seeing the areas where my flesh is stronger than my spirit and flipping that, right? Making my spirit stronger than my flesh. So yeah, it's been a really, really crazy experience. um, but I'm learning again, like going back to the prayer thing, like learning more about what it means to truly sit and pray. And so God's been breaking that down to me. Like, prayer is a conversation. And I know people say that all the time, but legit, like, sit down and talk to God. There has been so many moments this week where I've literally just been on my couch talking to God. And sometimes, like, he's not really saying anything, and other times he's dropping gems, but like literally just sitting here and be like, hey God, we're gonna talk about this. And I've been pouring on my heart, and it's been amazing. And it's just been like a refreshing wind to just be like, okay, like I'm excited now. Like, at the end of my day, I'm like, all right, let's go talk to God. Like, I'm leaving my friends. I'm like, yeah, before I go to bed, I'm gonna talk to God, because that's now the joy of my day, right? Because it's not pressure of like, what am I saying correctly? What type of prayer am I saying? Like, those things do matter. Do not get me wrong. Do not sit here and like be like, oh, she's bashing how people pray. No, but I'm saying, like, if you have to start off with just sitting down somewhere in a space and being like, hey God, and just talking regularly to God, that's okay. Because at some point you will get to that level where you're praying powerful prayers, and where you're, casting out demons and doing just binding spirits and stuff like that. You'll get there, but you have to start somewhere, right? And that's what God's teaching me about prayer. Like, start somewhere, start small. So yeah, I was very like shy in the beginning, and like I didn't really say much about like I was doing a lot of observing, because I wanted to observe before I like actually, stepped into it. And now, like, really looking back on it, I I did it. I was shy because like I honestly didn't know what I was doing, and I was more comfortable letting other people take the lead than me taking the lead, which is not good, you know what I'm saying? And so, honestly, like, in those moments is when I started seeing like, okay, God's about to shake something up in me, right? And so I get up there and lead a couple times, and I'm just feeling like, you know, this is off. Like, something is not right about this atmosphere. And it wasn't about the leading, it wasn't about the songs, like something about the atmosphere that we're worshiping in, the atmosphere that we're in, like there's something not right about it, right? And so growing up, like, I've always had like the gift of discernment, right? And so if you know about any gifts of the spirit, that God gives and things like that, like one of those is like discernment, right? And so I've always had a strong discernment for things, and I'm like, yeah, this ain't clicking the way it should be clicking. And it's been like that all 3 years. And so, but it was just more intense in that moment. And so in the beginning, I just started seeing a lot of things that God was like showing me. Like, He was just showing me all the broken places in Outcry, the broken places on my in my campus, and just all these things where it started to get very frustrating and overwhelming, because it's like I see what God's trying to do, but we're not doing it. And I felt like, okay, well, God, you're showing me for a reason. So what do you want me to do? Right. And so as I'm going through that, I'm like, okay, what are you truly calling out of me? Right. Because, so yeah, I was very like shy in the beginning, and like I didn't really say much about like I was doing a lot of observing, because I wanted to observe before I like actually, stepped into it. And now, like, really looking back on it, I I did it. I was shy because like I honestly didn't know what I was doing, and I was more comfortable letting other people take the lead than me taking the lead, which is not good, you know what I'm saying? And so, honestly, like, in those moments is when I started seeing like, okay, God's about to shake something up in me, right? And so I get up there and lead a couple times, and I'm just feeling like, you know, this is off. Like something is not right about this atmosphere. And it wasn't about the leading, it wasn't about the songs, like something about the atmosphere that we're worshiping in, the atmosphere that we're in, like it's there's something not right about it, right? And so growing up, like I've always had like the gift of discernment, right? And so if you know about any gifts of the spirit, that God gives and things like that, like one of those is like discernment, right? And so I've always had a strong discernment for things, and I'm like, yeah, this ain't clicking the way it should be clicking. And it's been like that all 3 years. And so, but it was just more intense in that moment. And so in the beginning, I just started seeing a lot of things that God was like showing me. Like He was just showing me all the broken places in Outcry, the broken places on my in my campus, and just all these things where it started to get very frustrating and overwhelming because it's like I see what God's trying to do, but we're not doing it. And I felt like, okay, well, God, you're showing me for a reason. So what do you want me to do? Right. And so as I'm going through that, I'm like, okay, what are you truly calling out of me? Right. Because I don't know. It was just really, how do I say, it wasn't difficult, but it was just very frustrating. Right. And so we're going out throughout the year. And as that starts getting tougher, I also start getting distracted by other things, right? And I'm not gonna go into like that deep of details. I don't need everybody in my business, but I was just entertaining things that I shouldn't have been entertaining at the time, right? And so it started taking my focus off of God. And the thing is, the thing I've learned, right, especially when it comes to like Satan and how like strategic he tries to be, like, or just in general when it comes to like distractions, when you sin, there's things that are taking you away from God, right? It's not going to happen in an instant. A lot of the times it's slow, so you don't even notice. Like, for example, like if you have a habit of like reading your Bible, post it more on here, and then we'll also post on like the regular, like, platforms, Apple, um Anchor, those things too. If you just want to watch the or listen to the audio, you can do that as well. But I just want to thank you guys for watching or listening, and we will see you, or I will see you next episode. Bye.